Chris, we've got the final set here in New York. Aryna Sabalenka against Jessica Pegula. Pegula making her maiden slam final, and Sabalenka reaching this final yet again for the second straight year. And will be bidding to become the first player since I think Angie Kerber to win both hardcourt slams in one season. But yeah, I mean, I think out of the two semi-finals, the most dramatic one was that Pegula Muchova clash. Pegula, she was 6-1, 2-love down. Muchova had points for 3-love, and she managed to turn it around. How did she do that, Chris? What a comeback.
What a comeback. And you have to think for Mukova, there was a volley that she had that would have put her at 3-love up. It wouldn't necessarily be a match point, but I mean, what a Houdini from Pegula. Really kind of stealing victory from the jaws of defeat. And I'm not sure how she does it, but I think the level headed Pegula, she is so relaxed in those moments. And sure, she did say afterwards that she thought it was a bit embarrassing. She felt like she was being
Mm.
made to look like a beginner. But that is what Mukova can do. And before the match, she said just how much she respected her. But everything was going in for Mukova. And I think Pegula was maybe slow to start. But I think as she started to play a bit better, it's so hard to keep the level that Mukova was playing at. I mean, if you played like that for two sets, I mean, you'd beat everyone and be world number one.
Yeah, I mean, it if Mukova was, outstanding in that first set, Pegula, like she said, was yeah, she felt embarrassed at the way it was playing. It was so one-sided. She felt like she was going to burst into tears, which, for someone in their first semi-final in front of their home crowd, it's not what you
Not
want, but
ideal.
I no, not ideal at all. But I think what's remarkable is that she just managed to then flip that around, thinking about all her family and friends and the crowd there and just, well, it could have been a very different story if she'd got kind of whitewashed out on that court. We'd be
Mm.
thinking, oh, first semi final, but didn't really stand a chance, wasn't in the match. And I think it's so good that she's managed to kind of turn this around and, from being destroyed to being the victor, coming out on top, making your first slam final. Like what performance like overall by the end of the match.
Absolutely. I
And
was going to
proving
say,
people wrong, actually. I
yes,
think
that's what
for
I
a
was going
lot
to
of
say.
doubters. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of doubters. And previously in Slam quarterfinals, prior to this year, she hadn't really had that much of an impact in the matches she's played. It was quite a lot of straight sets losses. And so for her brain not to go into, I think if it was many other players, they'd be thinking, here we go again.
Yeah.
And it didn't happen like that. She managed to flick the switch. Her form came just in time. But like a lot of players, not necessarily just players, but a lot of kind of the media hasn't always taken that interest in Pegula or given her sort of the respect that I think she deserves. And I think that
Mm.
this result, as you've talked about, like what a breakout performance. And it just kind of proves to everybody that Jessica Pegula is not only a top 10 player on the WTA tour, she is also a player who can compete for slams.
Well, and after beating Swiatek in the last round, she's a world number one beating player, and
Yeah,
now getting to these latter stages of slams, proving those doubters wrong. And I mean, we've doubted her in the
we
past. I think
have.
it's fair to say we've called her, the bridesmaid, the Andre Rublev of the
We
WTA
have,
tour,
yes.
which maybe now is
Sorry
an
if you're
unfair
listening, Jessica
comparison.
Pegula. Yeah.
Yeah. But she's definitely proved that, is a thing of the past, hopefully. And I mean, obviously she had so much good form coming in. She reached the final in Cincinnati, won in
Canada, yeah.
Canada. So she's had, major final titles. This what an incredible hard court swing. So it's sort of not a surprise that she's reached this stage.
Mm.
But I think, yeah, just in terms of that semi-final, it's that momentum shift and just managing to kind of turn it around. It's get I guess another I don't know what's the analogy I'm looking for, but it's just proven that she can
A
not
feather
only,
in her cap, should we
feather in her
say?
cap. Yes. I was trying to think, what
Yes.
would Joel say here? He'd always,
He,
it's
some
very
of
good
his
at bringing the
expressions,
analogies out,
yeah.
and
I'm
I'm
like, I
not
haven't
so good
heard
at
that in a
that.
while. Yeah, we'll go with that. A string in her
Yeah.
bow. Is that,
String
is
in
that?
her bow, that's it.
Yes. Okay,
Um,
we got there. But no, it's true. It's
winning
so
ugly and
impressive.
winning from different, standpoints. You've got to do them all if you're going to win slams, and she's kind of proving that
Yeah,
so
and it's
far with
happened a few
this result.
years in a row, hasn't it? That Coco Gauff had all the form coming in. She won, I think it was three tournaments in the run up to it. Or was it two? No, two tournaments. She won Washington and then Cincinnati. Final in Cincinnati, a winner in Canada, and then that form has carried the American all the way through to the final. So often we say with Wimbledon, if you win a lead up tournament, you're almost definitely not going to win the tournament based on what the stats are saying. Would you say that focusing on the hard court form coming in is the way that we should look at our predictions in future, Kim?
I think with the US hardcourt swing, it does tend to be slightly different, where the form coming in is more tangible, maybe, and does then reflect on the US Open courts. And I don't know if that's because the courts play more similarly, whereas some of the grass court tournaments are quite different grass to Wimbledon, or it's just, because the grass season it's so much more specialist and it's
Yeah.
coming after the clay season. Whereas here, you've got a bit of that kind of time. Although the Olympics this year has obviously put a bit of a
Well, she
spanner in the
went out
works.
early and Sabalenka didn't play. So maybe there's something to be said for not having the best run in the Olympics because obviously in that match with Qinwen Zheng, uh, I mean, she blew her off the court. So
She
maybe
did.
you can't have it all. And unfortunately for Mukova, she also couldn't have it all, which was a big shame after the injuries that she's had. Actually, both of these players, Kim, have had big layoffs from injury, much more significant for Mukova, who didn't even think that she'd be able to make it back for Wimbledon. She was targeting the Olympics, didn't have the best run there, but she did back up her semi-final performance. And obviously, such a shame that the sickness did hit her in the last round. Do you think that that had an impact on this result? And maybe that's why she was playing so aggressively in that first set to try and get it done quickly?
Yeah, because after the match, Mukova didn't really make any excuses
Mm.
or sort of say there was anything physical, but she did have, I think, like a stomach issue, like a bug or something from before. And I think, yeah, that will zap you of your energy. So it's probably after a certain amount of time on court, starting to feel depleted and just not able to kind of continue that, efficient form like
It
in
has
the
to
first
affect
set.
you, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, these people aren't, superhuman to the extent that they can put aside, you know,
Bodily
health and,
functions.
illness. Yeah, exactly. It's not like you can separate everything on the court. Obviously, ideally, you'd be able to kind of just, dissociate, but that's just, I don't think that's realistic. So it is a real shame that if that is the influencing factor for Mukova. But that's not to say, not to take anything away from Pegula, because we don't know, this could have been the scenario anyway. And Mukova
Hmm.
obviously isn't playing up the sickness or wanting to make any excuses, which is, very sporting of her.
Mm.
And she did play fantastic tennis in that first half of the match, especially.
Mm.
And she's had a great tournament, making the
Yeah.
semis again. I think on the whole, she'd be really, really happy with that. Compared to where she was, after the US Open last year and that injury.
I mean, it was such a long layoff, wasn't it? And we spoke to her in Eastbourne, I think it was the first tournament she had back, and asked her about the recovery. She didn't pick up a racket for such a long period of time. It was such a tricky injury for her to come back from. And Pegula said before that she was so impressed with her level that pretty much whenever she picks up a racket, she's a real danger, no matter how much she's been playing, whether she's been injured. So, Kim, that leads me to a question. Will Mukova win a slam in 2025? Can she carry this form over?
Oh, well, that's $1 million question, Chris. I'd like to think that she can. And I think if she's not hampered by injury, which, to some extent is obviously out of your control, and it's just the luck of the draw as to whether you get an injury and the severity of it, then if she can keep this form going, I don't see why not. Obviously, she's already reached a major final at Roland Garros before. I think I predicted her to win a slam a couple of years ago.
I think
So,
it was Roland Garros,
uh,
maybe. Yeah.
which is always the hardest one with Iga Swiatek. But maybe, she's not so infallible as we thought. But
Mm,
yeah, I don't see why not. I think she's right up there. She's got a game for all surfaces, and if she can keep this momentum going, obviously with the off season and the transition into the new year, sometimes players who excel at the end of one season don't always keep that
mm,
going. So that can be, just the sort of the time factor on that may influence things. But I think the answer is yes, it's possible,
yes.
but I can't be 100% sure, Chris,
No,
as
you
as ever
can't
with the
see the
game that we know
future.
and love.
Yes.
But yeah, she has definitely, had a very commendable tournament, reaching the semi-finals here. And JPEG, just a final note on her, picking it around from, on the verge of tears to being in your first Grand Slam final. What a
So impressive.
fabulous,
Yeah.
gritty
In
performance
front of
to
your
come through that.
home crowd as well. That is
Yes,
big.
New York born, I think she is. So yeah, really fantastic stuff. And will she be able to, emulate what Coco Gauff did 12 months ago. Because
Mm.
she is the only American in the final this time, but she is up against the same woman that Coco Gauff
The only
faced.
billionaire.
Yeah, she's the only billionaire in the final because Aryna Sabalenka came through Emma Navarro in the other semi-final. Straight sets, this was 6-3, 7-6. Although Sabalenka making a bit of hard work of that second set. She did serve for it. Navarro broke back. It went to a tie break. But Sabalenka coming through 7-2 in the tie break. So she does reach back-to-back finals here at the US Open, which Chris, she's the first player to do that since
Ooh, got to be Serena.
Serena, yep,
Phew.
absolutely. 2019, Serena Williams was the last women's player to reach back-to-back finals here at the US Open.
Hmm.
Sabalenka's going to be up against a very partisan local crowd again, isn't she?
Yes,
Come
yes.
Saturday.
She's relishing it, I think. One of the things that I think is quite funny is that every time she's playing in New York, she's almost always in these later rounds playing against Americans. And Coco Gauff last year, she's had Emma Navarro, and then also she's doing it all over again with Pegula in the final. She did say, and I thought you might like this as well, she'd get margaritas for everyone if they cheered for her. That's quite expensive. Arthur Ashe, what's the capacity of Arthur Ashe? Like 20,000, something like that?
So that's very expensive. I mean, if she'll need to win the trophy then to take that out of the paycheck
Yeah,
to pay for
true.
all
I
of
mean, it probably
the
does
drinks
cover
she's
it.
offering.
Yeah, it can come out of the honey juice fund as well, can't it? But I mean, she said double shots of tequila, and I think maybe she hasn't looked at the prices. I don't think she's a drinker herself, obviously. So um, that could get expensive. And it didn't necessarily work because the crowd were very much against her until the very end when they were cheering her on ahead of the final. So she said, "Where was this support when I needed it?" Afterwards, to when she was interviewed on court. But for Sabalenka, it does feel a little bit different this year. I think she's felt like she really wants to right the wrong of last year's final, which I think did get away from her. And there probably are some regrets that she has about that result. A lot of those matches at Slams last year were so close. She could have got more titles than just the AO. So I think for her, getting two Slams in one season, I mean, it's such a big goal for her. And I think it would make for a very interesting situation, Kim, where she would have the most slams on the WTA Tour in terms of uh, current holders of them. She'd have won two slams in a season. So that's quite an interesting dynamic at the top of the rankings.
Yeah, as we said earlier, that's not been done since Kerber, I think, winning, well, both hardcourt slam titles in the same year, but also just two slams in the same year. Well,
Hmm.
I know, I think Swiatek won two a couple of years ago,
I
didn't she,
think it
when she
makes you,
won the
yeah,
US Open?
but it makes you think though that Osaka, she did the US to Australia. So she did
Double twice.
consecutive. Yeah, but
Mm.
she didn't necessarily do it in the same calendar year, which feels a bit, I don't know, feels like she's being robbed of a mention there
Harsh to not
because
count it.
yeah, I mean, she did it in a quicker turnaround. So maybe it's about winning the first and the last. That's, as you said, the form book. It's quite hard to keep that form throughout the year.
Yeah, it's funny how the January to December calendar determines a lot of the stats, but if you looked at it
It's
from
not
like the
rolling
tax
apart like the
year or something,
rankings. Yeah, the
it'd be very
tax
different.
year. Yeah, exactly.
But Sabalenka, she does have an incredible run of form at the Slams. I think
Mm,
since 2022 Roland Garros,
mm.
she's not lost before the quarterfinals, which is, incredibly consistent. So do you think she is arguably like the best all-rounder across the Slams of recent years, Chris?
That's a great question. I think so. The results don't lie. We've seen quite a lot of early exits for Iga, third rounds, fourth rounds, whereas Sabalenka is a consistent presence at all of those later stages. And the only quarterfinal she's had, she was quite obviously hampered by
Mm.
injury against Mira Andreeva, and then she obviously did withdraw from Wimbledon. So even making the quarterfinal in that respect is pretty impressive under the circumstances. Her game, if you hit the ball as hard as she does, I think probably it works on any court. It's a bit like Sharapova, who started not necessarily, well, I mean, this is an understatement. She called herself a cow on ice on clay. Um, and she used to play it like a hard court. But if you do play it like a hard court, you can still get the ball past so many players. Um, and Sabalenka is hitting her forehand harder than Djokovic, Sinner, and Alcaraz at this tournament, which is, I mean, that's monumental. I
Amazing.
mean, talk about a fantastic stat for women's tennis that you think they should be jumping on. I think she's 1 mile per hour quicker than Sinner. So I'm not sure if that average will stay the same for the whole tournament. But I mean, she's hitting the cover off the ball and she can hit anyone. She can hit a barn door off a wall and she can also hit anyone off the court, that's for sure.
Well, she certainly hit Emma Navarro off the court, although Navarro was a very respectable performance for
Good
someone who was
showing.
in her first slam final, at a home tournament with the home crowd. She certainly wasn't phased too much. She still turned up. So that was good. And she's had a fantastic tournament, getting the win over Coco Gauff and then Paula Badosa and reaching this stage for the first time. So, her star is still on the rise itself. And I look forward to seeing more from her at the
Yeah.
slams in 2025 as well, because I think, I'd like to see her, go further as well. I think she's someone I do quite enjoy watching. And yeah, it's definitely been such a breakout season for her, culminating in your first slam semi-final. What a
Yeah.
year for Emma Navarro.
It's funny, isn't it? Because she was playing challenger events early in the year and playing 125 tournaments,
Yeah.
and now she's in slam semi-finals. It does remind me of Andreescu, who had some challenger titles on her roster when she actually won the US Open. So when you look at the points, it's quite funny that some of them are made up from these small tournaments, but now she's very much a
Yeah.
big time player. So she won't be entering a 125 anytime soon. Now she's, well, in the top 10. In fact, she'll be ranked number 8, I believe, at the end of this tournament. And she'll be a force to be reckoned with in Asia with this confidence and the level that she's been playing at. And maybe I'll eat my words saying that she wasn't playing her best tennis in New York, because she did put on a great showing. And who knows, Sabalenka might go on to win the title.
Yeah, well, Navarro could be one to watch maybe for the end of season finals. It sounds like that could be,
A
a
goal.
a good goal opportunity for her. I know come next year she's going to have a lot of points to then defend. That's the sort of downside of having a big breakout year, gaining lots of points. You got to back it up 12 months later. But yeah, very good showing from Navarro for this US Open.
Mm.
Great for American tennis. Two Americans in the women's semis, two in the men's as well. So they've had a fantastic tournament. But let's look to the final, because we do have Sabalenka against Pegula. They have played 7 times before, Chris. The
Hmm.
head-to-head is 5-2 in favor of Sabalenka. And their most recent showing was, of course, that Cincinnati final just a couple of weeks ago, which was straight sets to Sabalenka, 6-3,
Mm.
7-5. So based on their previous matches, I mean, where are you thinking for the final? Do you think that extra kind of experience and the better head-to-head is going to favor Sabalenka?
I always hope that you'll go first when we get to what do we think will happen? Because now I'm thinking, how do I say I can say two things at once, maybe. I think the first set is going to be so important. Um, Pagula is particularly good when she gets that first set. Obviously, she did come back from behind against Muchova, and I think having that sort of result or not having the form in what is the biggest match of your career at this point for Pagula and turning it around, that's a lot of confidence you can take from that. So whatever the scoreline is, if Sabalenka is up, 6-1, 3-love, Pagula will still think, I've got a shot in this. And that belief, I think, will be really important in the final. Having said that, Pegula could also be playing with a renewed sense of freedom. She could come out, and I think you do almost scrap the form book at this point, because it's such a different environment and you're almost starting with a clean slate. It's a 3-set shootout to win the biggest title, well, in front of the biggest crowd in tennis. So if it goes to 3, I think Pegula is rock solid in some of those really tight moments. But again, that first set, it could also be Sabalenka in 2. So this is one of the most even. I mean, last year's final was pretty even on the balance of the form book. And I feel like
Mm.
we're having a very similar situation here. It could be Sabalenka in 2 if she plays her top level. If she doesn't, it could slip away from her.
Yeah, I think it depends what sort of Sabalenka turns up and
Yes.
how she's impacted by the crowd
And the
being against
margaritas.
her. The margaritas, yeah. So I think it kind of it rests on Sabalenka's racket for me.
Mm,
Although, looking at the head-to-head, a lot of the wins that Sabalenka's had have come, when Pegula's probably not the player that she is currently now in the form that she's in. So how much we rely on that head-to-head, I'm not sure. But I guess based on their recent meeting in Cincinnati, I think going from that, I would give Sabalenka the edge. I mean, she
mm.
was my pick at the start of the tournament to
Oh,
win.
Kim.
Who did you go for,
I think I
Chris? I
went
can't
for her
remember.
making the final and then losing to
Right.
Eager, I think. But I
Oh,
mean, that went
eager.
out the
Okay.
completely out the window. Um, but I mean, Sabalenka, as you say, she's done it before. She really did play so well in the AO final. That was really impressive. And you have to think that mentally, you'd hope that she thinks she has the edge, because this is definitely, and the way she's talking about it, as though this is the one that she wants to make sure that she gets after last year's. But we've seen that with Ons Jabeur. You can't expect that you're going to win it. You really can't. You have to go in there with believing that you can, but not expecting that you will, because I think no one's going to hand it to you. And Jessie Pegula fights for every single point, and she does love the pace. You look at some of their results that have happened, WTA finals, tricky conditions last year. Pegula got the win in straight sets. Previously at the WTA finals, it was a win for Sabalenka. So it is a case that if it was on clay, you definitely would go with Sabalenka. But hard court and in an American audience situation, it might level it a little bit, Kim.
Yeah, I think for me as well, though, a big factor is that first final kind of nerves, which
Sets
you
the
get from a
tone.
lot of players, and not everyone. Some people go into their first slam final and they're fine, but I think more often than not, it's nervy, it's edgy. Your first slam final, especially at home, how is Pegula going to manage those nerves? Because they're going to be there. But I think if she goes into it just thinking, well, look, I could have been down and out in those semi-finals.
Yeah.
It's kind of a miracle that I came through that. So let's just go for it because I've got nothing to lose.
Yeah. I could see
Whereas
that.
Sabalenka, the pressure's probably more on her, with being the more experienced player at this stage of a
Yeah.
slam. So yeah, it's going to be a very intriguing final. I think it's a
Ooh.
great matchup. I think we've got a good final ahead of us.
What
I'm
would we
going to stick.
predict though, Kim? Sets, come on. I'm making you go first this time.
Oh, I'm going to say Sabalenka in two, but I think it might be a similar scoreline to the Navarro match, maybe like a tie break, 6-3,
Yeah.
6-4.
I am just a
Yeah.
believer today. I don't know why. Pagula, the story of coming back from behind. I think it's going to be three sets Pagula. And I'm not
Okay.
just saying that to be different, Kim. So that one of us is right, hopefully.
We're not just hedging our bets between
Yeah.
us, like
Yeah.
going for the
When there's
two
three
most
of
likely
us, we
scenarios.
all get exposed, I think. But two, we can say
Yeah.
one either way.
Well, listeners, let us know who you think's going to win. Let us know on social media. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And we do hope you've enjoyed our latest episode of the Tennis Weekly podcast. Remember to subscribe to us to stay up to date on all of the action from the final weekend of Flushing Meadows. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and all major podcasting platforms out there. And if you like what you're hearing, then make sure to leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Plus, like and subscribe to us on YouTube and hit that notification bell.
You can also follow us on social media or you can email the show. We're on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and X. And the handle for all of those is Tennis Weekly Pod. We have a sale at the moment on our merch store. It's 25% off if you go to etsy.com/shop/Tennis Weekly Podcast. You can always email us, tell us what you think about our predictions, tell us who's going to win. And that's tennisweeklypod@gmail.com. Or do check out our wonderful website, tennisweekly.co.uk.
And we'll be back on Monday evening at Tennis Weekly HQ for our finals catch up of the US Open, brought to you by Fungible. So I hope you can join us all for that. If you can't wait until then, we will be posting videos to our YouTube before the full podcast comes out. So do check us out on there if you want to get ahead of the game. But in the meantime, it's goodbye from Chris.
Goodbye.
And it's goodbye from me. We'll see you again soon.